Sure, my name's Robert Titus. I'm a sheet metal worker out of Local 33 in Charleston, West Virginia, and I live in Pomeroy, Ohio.
And what do you remember about the Silver Bridge falling?
On December 15, 1967, I was a 13-year-old 8th grader attending the old Pomeroy Junior High School in Pomeroy, Ohio. And on the weekends, we usually went to Savage's Pool Hall in Pomeroy just to watch people play pool and sometimes play a game of pool ourselves. And so we were downtown in Pomeroy. We'd walked off Lincoln Hill. We were in the pool hall approximately 7 o'clock that evening on December 15th, 1967. And someone rushed into the pool hall and said that the Silver Bridge had fallen in the Ohio River. Well, no one believed this person because he was a young guy and we figured he was just pulling a prank on us. And he was very serious about it and he seemed upset. And then a short time later, other people came in to the pool hall and confirmed this young man's story that the bridge had indeed fallen. And I thought back to the summer of '67, me and my buddy Johnny Freeman had ridden bicycles across the Silver Bridge. And I remember how the bridge bounced up and down really hard whenever a semi-trailer went past us. So and the river was up that night, and I figured anybody that fell in that river in the dark was in a lot of trouble. And they said there were quite a few vehicles on the bridge that night, and I was sad to hear that.
So did you go visit the site after you...
I'm sorry?
Did you go visit the site after?
Yes, my parents took us down there several days later, and they had signs across on the Ohio side saying bridge closed or bridge out, and there was a lot of traffic because people were coming by to do the same thing we were doing to see, and of course the Ohio approach was still intact, but it just went up into the air. Of course the bridge was on the ground. And I remember reading the stories in the Sunday Daily Sentinel, and the Athens Messenger had quite a bit of coverage of the event and some pictures, and it was hard to believe for a 13-year-old kid like myself that a bridge could actually fall in. And I can remember people being really nervous about the Pomeroy Mason Bridge because it was about the same age as the Silver Bridge, but a different design. And people were very leery about getting stuck in traffic on the bridge. They would wait like on either side of the bridge until the traffic was out of sight over the hump in the bridge before they'd go across. So it was quite a tragic event. And even though I lived 15 miles upstream from it, I didn't know of anybody that died on the bridge, but it was, for a young kid such as myself, when you think of something that looks so sturdy, but yet it collapsed, you kind of shook my confidence in bridges for a long time.
How did you get across to the other side and back if you needed to?
Well, as a student, I didn't have much reason to go across the Ohio River, but my dad worked at the Phillips Bourne plant in New Haven, and I think they had a ferry boat set up maybe in Pomeroy because they had good landings on the Pomeroy and Mason side. So whenever Dad had to go to work, I figured he took a ferry boat across. Well, the Pomeroy Mason Bridge was there too, that's right, it didn't, but for people down here they used a ferry. But whenever our bridge was undergoing repair, that's what they did. But it posed a lot of hardship on people because, people had to detour around where the bridge used to be.
How did you visit the next day?
Oh no, Dad was against that because they were still doing the recovery operations. It was probably several weeks later. It wasn't right after. It probably wouldn't have been until sometime It might have even been in the spring of 1968. It wasn't right away because Dad had been in the military in World War II out in the Pacific. He was a Seabee, and he just knew that, you know, there was recovery work going on, and he didn't want us around it. Mm-hmm. So it was a long time after the bridge fell before we finally got to drive by the site and see. But of course, the approaches on each side of the river were intact for several months afterwards. So it was still quite a shock to see it.
What kind of stories were going around the communities?
Well, there were differing stories on the number of people that were on the bridge and how the bridge fell. One of the stories we heard is when the bridge fell, the deck twisted upside down and mashed the vehicles into the bottom of the Ohio River. On the, you know, it was really gruesome, some of the stories, because I remember hearing several stories about the recovery divers going into the river and encountering catfish the size of a grown man at the bottom, and some of the divers just simply refused to go back in the water after that. They quit. And then I've heard some stories about people clinging to floating material and then being rescued from the water. And of course, there were 2 bodies that were never recovered, and there was some talk about that, but a lot of it concerned the way the bridge fell. It was so quick, and when it fell, it twisted, and it just threw all those vehicles, and it was crowded with shopping traffic because it was just 10 days away from Christmas, and it was just, and most of the stories I think were fairly accurate, but of course, I don't know for a fact that the catfish were really that big, but I do know they do have big catfish in the Ohio River because some of my buddies fish, but it was just a sad story.
How did it affect the community? How did it affect the community?
How did it affect me?
No, the community.
Oh, the community up there? Well, everybody was buying up newspapers. They were particularly touched by the stories of the families who lost more than one member. And of course, some of the people were from out of state, and then just how it was so fateful that they happened to be on the bridge at that moment when it collapsed. And then, of course, there were the heartening stories, the people who survived. You know, there was one man who was rescued, and 2 of his buddies who were in the vehicle with him died. You know, why did he live and why did the other 2 die? You know, it was just fate.
How about you? How did it affect you in the following years?
I had never been exposed to an incident like that before. Growing up in a small town like Pomeroy, you know, we're kind of out of the mainstream as far as major events are concerned. It's a very quiet place to grow up, and here just down the river from us, you know, this was a national tragedy, and you know, even the president, you know, had called it such, and there was the promise to rebuild the bridge, and it just, you realize that you can be living your life normally, and then all of a sudden your life can come to an abrupt end. It made me really think, even though I was just 13 years old at the time, made me think about my mortality a little bit. And maybe you need to do something meaningful with your life, and just, it made me want to help people because I felt sorry for the ones that had lost so much.
Is there any other stories you'd like to share?
Oh, I think that pretty much sums it up. I can remember in the summer of 1974, when I was home from college, that there was a news story on, I think it was Channel 3 or Channel 13, one or the other, about the bridge piers being torn down that were out in the Ohio River, not the approaches on either side of the river, but there were 2 concrete piers out in the river, and they were finally demolishing them, which eliminated the last visible reminder of the bridge being there. And I thought that was probably cathartic for the community to see those piers gone, because even though they knew the bridge was there wasn't an active reminder of the bridge being there. It was just a memory at that point.